Well, thanks so much, Rich, for having me. My name is Chelsea Haring, and I'm the founder and lead consultant at Grow Together Solutions. I have a background in sales, technology, and consulting, and I started Grow Together Solutions in 2022 to be able to work more exclusively with CEOs and company growth leaders on how to better achieve their growth goals, considering all the changes that businesses and customers have navigated the past 2 years during the pandemic.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
And that really takes advantage of your background, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So in the past, I've served as a CEO, a COO, a director of sales and partnerships, and also a key enterprise account manager in both technology and consulting companies. And I understand the challenges that many early stage companies can face when establishing their product or service offering in a market, especially during such a considerable time of change. And, I was able to leverage that experience the past 2 years to benefit companies that I worked with, and I'm excited to be able to do that more broadly now, running my own firm.
Well, congratulations, first of all. And I know anybody who works with you will have an amazing opportunity to work with someone who has so much experience and knowledge. So they'll be very fortunate. Now, as you talk about some of this experience that you've had, going back, when you're setting up a company and you're going through that first phase of, let's say, MVP, if we're talking about a technology company,
Sure.
what are some of the hurdles that you're facing as a COO or CEO in that company?
Well, I think the first thing that I would be remiss in saying above all others is how are you funding the work, right? Because especially if you're producing a technology product, you have that early stage challenge of having enough capital to be able to pay your team that's producing that product, secure your initial set of customers who are really experiencing that MVP product and helping you adapt and evolve it over time. And so how you're going to fund those early years are really a key challenge for early teams. And, I've worked in 3 or 4 different settings with different funding structures. And, I have, of course, my own preference, but I think for the founders that I support, they just have to figure out a funding structure that will give them the flexibility to evolve as their clients' needs evolve. And so that can be getting really creative with different types of capital that you're bringing into the business.
So no matter what kind of funding you have, you're gonna need to structure the company in a proper way,
Yes.
right? So if you're going to go to bank financing, or if you're going to go to an investor group or an angel group, you're going to need to produce stuff for them, right?
Yes.
So when you're going through that process, what are some of the pain points that exist, and then how do you see, or what advice would you give for entrepreneurs to overcome some of those pain points?
Yeah, I think a lot of times you get the dreaded question sometimes in those early years of, have you established product market fit, right? And that can be a really challenging question because it's sort of that classic chicken and egg problem of, have you proven out with that early set of customers the clear wins and the case studies that you need to scale the business? Or are you still in the earlier figuring it out how the product can be optimized with a client set? So, in my experience, how to handle that question really centers on the expertise the team has in-house. And any team that I've worked with, we look to say, what is the problem set that we are experts in, whether the product is at that expert spot or not. We're experts in the problem and understanding the needs of our customers, and really try to project that and build a lot of the initial company structure centered around the expertise the company already has.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. From a technology standpoint, when you're setting up that company, you're looking to bring in some funding because, as you said, it's critical. You can only bootstrap so far before you get to a point of diminishing return, right?
Right.
What are some of the tools that you would use early on as you're building out the company? You know, we talked about like in our pre-interview stuff, like, you know, are you using Google Docs or MS Office? You know, what are some of your favorites and why?
Well, some of my favorites I think I just inherited by default, but most of the companies I've worked for utilize Mac infrastructure instead of PCs. And so naturally went to systems like Google Docs and other products that were just better optimized on those operating systems. One of the things that I really found valuable at every company I've served in a leadership role at was a really good business planning software, and I've used different products. The last company that I was responsible for, we used Live Plan for a lot of our forecasting and planning and just putting together kind of that initial growth plan and pitch for investors in terms of where the company was heading. But quite frankly, a lot of our products that we were utilizing in those early stages were kind of standalone. It took a lot of work to integrate them. And quite often we were lacking just kind of that one-stop dashboard, if you will, to be able to kind of navigate the different systems and setting up the initial operations.
Yeah, that's been our experience as well, and thanks for sharing that. You know, certainly, planning is really critical, and having the tools connected so that you can see what your goal set is, and then work towards achieving that, and then ultimately being able to respond to that investor or that bank with the proper documentation, etc. Right. And, where are those documents is a question that we've gotten a lot. And I'm sure you've experienced that as well. Like, I need that data and I need those documents, and if they're in disparate places, right, it becomes a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it also, one of the things, having navigated a merger in the past as a CEO that was challenging, was also managing the communications with key stakeholder groups. And a lot of times those communications need to be extremely targeted, strategic, and also can contain some information for certain stakeholder groups, other information for others. And I found the infrastructure we had to manage the various communications to different stakeholder groups tended to be really distributed and decentralized as well.
Interesting. Actually, yesterday on another interview, one of the founders said that he was using MailChimp as a tool to send out a quarterly email to all his investors. So it got them a baseline of information so that then they could, get more specific. But, because the same thing, it's coming at him from all different directions, and he's at like a Series A level. So I can imagine the number of people that are involved at that time is got to be somewhat mind-numbing, and to organize and manage it is difficult, right?
Yes, definitely. So I think as many tools as you can use to just make it more efficient, the better.
So in terms of other hurdles, you're at that M&A stage, and in general terms, what's some advice that you can give to an entrepreneur who's heading in that direction to smooth the waters, because that's tumultuous. It can be very challenging.
I think having a really clear vision, and I'm referencing a merger process right now. I know there's certain things with different transactions like this that you can say and you can't say to different key stakeholder groups. But for the stakeholder groups like investors, where you really need to communicate the value, the long-term growth that can be achieved from navigating the transaction strategically, you really need to have that core vision. I think sometimes people focus on long-term vision, like you're coached to do in the early stages of being a CEO or a founder. But I found like the 3 to 5 year vision and snapshot was actually more meaningful to many of our investors. They wanted to see not necessarily what does this look like 1 to 2 years from now, but what can we start to see 3 to 5 years from now, even if that's just a stepping stone towards the longer term vision. And so I think having that sort of mid-focused vision is really important as it ties to the transaction and the benefits the business will receive from navigating it successfully.
Now, when you talk about that and having longer term vision, it kind of takes me to a slide on a pitch deck when you're talking about the TAM, the SAM, and the SOM.
Sure.
How important is it in your mind as a CEO to really focus early on that SOM and get that, how narrow or broad should that be when your obtainable market that you're going after now with your MVP, and then
Right.
to get to $1 million?
Yeah, I think it really should be broad enough that it's meaningful and it showcases the expertise. Remember, we were talking about earlier kind of the in-house expertise that the team has in a core problem set. So it should be broad enough to show and demonstrate the company's expertise and position to be able to work with their core markets. Leveraging products and services. So I think it needs to be broad enough that it's applicable and can show growth, but focused enough that you can rally a team behind it. And so I think
Yeah.
that's the delicate balance that a lot of times founders struggle with when they're getting to that first million in revenue. Is how do I keep this focused enough that the team comes to work every day motivated on what they're trying to achieve and the direction they're heading and how their work is contributing to that, but also be broad enough that I can show the potential to scale.
Interesting. So, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Getting to that next step. I think there's natural extension points of what that SOM is when you do achieve certain
Yeah.
markers. Like, would you articulate that as a CEO to your team, or and say, hey, once we get to this level, then we're going to be doing this, or do you keep that under your hat?
I think it would depend, quite honestly, on the business. I always tried to be as transparent with my team as I could. And so to me, I wanted everyone to feel really energized to come to work every day, knowing how their role impacted the company. And I wanted the group as a whole to feel like we're co-creating with our customers our future success. So we grow as our customers grow. That's why I named my company today Grow Together Solutions, because I found that as medium and larger size companies really automate a lot of their engagement, a lot of the client experience and the sales processes, small businesses especially can have such a competitive advantage when you leverage that human interaction and engagement and really build those meaningful relationships. A lot of your customers early on will stick with you during times of change because they experience that high value engagement that you can use your human capital to really leverage and inspire people. So to me, it was really, really important because of that to be as
Yeah.
transparent as possible with where we were going with the team.
So let's riff off of that, because I think it's really important when you talk about engagement and you have these core members of your team. When you're small, that is your team. It's like your
Yeah.
inner circle, and then you usually grow and add on. But what are you expecting from them? If I put my CEO hat on and I'm saying I need to report out, I need to make sure that my investors have certain set of information. I need to be able to operate and make decisions as a CEO. What are you expecting from those core team members? Like, how do they parse information and get it to you in a meaningful way? Do you have some antidotes or solutions there?
Yeah, so for me, because I rely so much on making decisions based on what's best for the collective whole, but really specifically within that, what are the needs of our customers and how are they evolving over time? But sometimes as a CEO, you're farthest removed from listening and having that opportunity to engage customers. So for me, with my various team leads, especially if they were in front facing functions of the business, I really relied on almost kind of a drip campaign of these are the insights we're hearing from the market. And my team leads knew that I really wanted to see, in addition to some of the metrics they were responsible for producing in terms of outcome, I also wanted to hear insights from the market, things that I should be thinking about. This is what we think is coming around the corner for our customers. I always tried to keep that information centered in addition to metrics I was looking at. So you kind of had the quantitative and the qualitative when you could make decisions.
Interesting. Excellent. And so you touched on something there. When you talk about metrics and you have the KPIs, right? That everybody, all right, I have to figure out what my KPIs are for our business, and then I need to be able to disseminate those, get that information in, and then get it out, of course, and track it on a continual basis. Um, do you have any advice about managing those? Selecting which KPIs, managing them, and then how do you kind of move forward to track them properly?
Yeah, this was a process that was constantly evolving at every company that I was fortunate enough to participate in leadership in. In some company settings, the last company I came from, Harkin, we used the OKR process instead of KPIs. That was a new learning for me, and it required us to do constant reiteration. We did retrospectives built into that. When we were setting objectives and key results, it was sort of a tiered down system where we had company-wide OKRs, then team focused, and then individual focused. So it took quite a bit of work to put together. I've also worked in settings where you're just really diligently setting your KPIs. I don't think I have a preference one way or the other, but I will say to your comment about how do you organize that, having those engagement opportunities for the entire team built into whatever tools you're using, I think is really important. So I think it isn't just a set of OKR or a KPI planning meeting, decide and go. I think it's a little bit more of a, human-centered design process where you're saying, all right, let me listen to where everyone's at in the business right now. How does that inform what we need to be focused on, knowing that our long-term vision is what it is? And then how do I accommodate the needs of my employees, my customers, my leadership team members, my investors in putting these together for this year? So, we really approached it as a bit more of a cyclical process. And after every quarter, we had a retrospective, and our team, especially at Harkin, was really skilled at saying, this is what we did well, this is what we did not do well, here's how we want to change this process as we go. But quite honestly, Rich, that lived in, we created our own folder structure for that, and we leveraged Google Docs and Sheets and all. It wasn't necessarily organized. We weren't using a product for that. It was pretty manual.
Okay. And I think that's true with a lot of companies because there's not really anything out there that can do that. Now, what is out there is data rooms. And so traditionally, data rooms are what investors use to aggregate content. And I've heard from other CEOs saying, every one of my investors has a different data room product. Some of them are things that they've invested in. And so, there's all this self-serving interest. But how do you manage that process of like going from this Google Docs to dumping stuff into data rooms? Because you've been through that process.
It was very manual, and I would say burdensome. As a founder and CEO, I'm always focused on, especially in the early stages, getting to profitable as soon as possible, right? Because once you reach that point, you have a lot more autonomy and flexibility in making growth decisions. And so I was always looking for capital and growth plans that would get us to profitable through that meaningful service. And, different investors that I've been lucky enough to work with also had different requirements for their own portfolios. And so what I found in the past, it just required a lot of scheduling and planning and manual entry a lot of times for myself or, a counterpart on the leadership team. But we really handled those manually. And so that meant once a quarter, we were often, going to the list of logins for the various data rooms and entering in a little bit of different information, it seemed, from our core documents that we had, but it was not streamlined, nor was it efficient, I will say.
But I bet you don't miss those days.
I actually don't, but I think it's one of those key things though that you kind of grin and bear it, and then you think someone will come along eventually and solve this problem.
Right. Well, hopefully we're on track. So,
yes.
as we go through this process, and we're certainly learning so much from folks like yourself, because it's not just about, saying, hey, I got a product and launching it. It's about really understanding the marketplace. And, so this insight is absolutely critical. In business, I look to folks like you to provide insight to me, and so we've had other conversations before this. Who are your business mentors? Do you have any that you focus on, and why?
Oh, it's a really great question. And to be totally honest, Rich, I don't have any one specific business mentor. I have worked to build relationships with many mentors who I've been fortunate enough to learn from. And I'm really grateful for all of them. In terms of an example, one of the people I've most benefited from having direct support from is my executive coach and longer term mentor. Karen is the founder of MetaSkills Consulting, and spent several years in the private equity world. She's an organizational and clinical psychologist, and I am really interested in human behavior and organizational development as much as I am growth and business operations and achieving outcomes. And so she was a really good fit for me to help balance kind of my interests in just creating a really meaningful culture and environment for people to work in addition to achieving our business goals. So I'm really especially grateful for her, and also just really understood the challenges of being a parent and running a company, and was able to support me in managing both wanting to be a really involved parent and being a really hands-on leader as well.
I'm glad to say that there's more examples of that coming forward in today's society, right? That people no longer say, "Oh, well, it's a woman and she may get pregnant," as it's just an absolutely horrid way in which to deal with human behavior when some of the best, I think, CEOs out there have been women, and allowing them to have that flexibility and understanding that this is part of life, right?
Absolutely. And I think for me, I didn't grow up, I came from a pretty blue collar family. I'm really the only person in my family that's in business and has grown into an executive role. And so I just didn't really have a lot of those role models in my personal network. And so finding those people, especially as my career advanced, it seemed like there were fewer and fewer parents in the room. And so I had to find, really a group of supportive colleagues. I will say, though, I also had a lot of leaders and colleagues who weren't parents who just have been very, very supportive. But I think it is a challenge if you are in a caregiving role, right? And I want to call that out because it's not just parents. There's people who are caring for their parents or, have some type of a caregiving role. There can be the real push-pull sometimes between your work commitments and your personal commitments.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and thank you for bringing that out. And that goes towards some of the social components of running a company. So there's another kind of avenue into managing those expectations and those that ethos as a CEO. So you have have a certain mindset as you come into it. What are we going to be? What are we going to stand for? How are we going to broadly talk about that to the community? What are some ways in which you've done that in the past, and what improvements are needed for companies who are looking at social components to their business?
Well, I think everything I've learned probably the hard way has been just through being open to failing, right? And not getting it right, and then listening and understanding lived experience and getting it, adjusted and fixed the next time. So I think, on the very broad level, I would say that, as a leader, you're responsible for thinking about what you do as a company, but also how you do it, and start to integrate your planning around both the what and the how. So I think a lot of times we focus so much on the what is the product, who is the customer, what are our goals? And then we're not thinking through what's the experience for everybody involved and how we're going to get there. And so I learned that very quickly early on in my leadership career, and then tried to incorporate ways in all of my planning and strategy work to think through the how as much as the what.
That's great advice. And as we talk about advice, if you're going to meet with a new CEO, what are some of the things that you would share with them that you've learned over the years, and maybe in the back of your mind you're saying, I don't do this because I failed there. What are some of the challenges that you've had that you would provide as advice to other people?
Yeah, I think first thing I would say, and this is probably one thing that I wish I would have, maybe a piece of advice I would have heard earlier on in my career, but just the fact that you will fail, right? Despite all your diligence and planning and all the research and information gathering, I'm a very thoughtful, diligent leader. And I put a lot of time and energy into kind of putting a comprehensive picture together for the company of where we're going. And, despite all of that diligence and planning, in my experience, half of it won't go according to plan. And that's okay, because the key stakeholder groups you've been selected to lead by trust you to navigate when it doesn't go according to plan as well. But I think that would be, one piece of advice I would share is it's inevitable. You will have failures, you will have setbacks, you will have planned as much as you can plan. And part of being a good leader is also how do you adapt when you need to and continue to bring everyone along with you when that's required.
I'm going to be somewhat self-serving here because, with Cofolio, our motto or our tagline is empowering entrepreneurs. And
Yep.
One of the things that I found is as CEOs, we struggle often with making sure that everybody is empowered to do their job, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's my marketing person or my CFO, you want your team to be empowered to do their best jobs, but very few people are supporting you as a CEO, right?
Yeah.
And empowering you to be able to be a great leader. So if we're going to strip away everything and provide some tools to you, what are those things that you need to be empowered, to be a better you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really, really clear because I've just learned as a CEO, my personal style is really providing meaningful service to everyone in our key stakeholder group. So for me, that means I need to have feedback loops and I need to have insights. How are my investors feeling about things? How are my employees feeling about things? How are my customers feeling about things? So really getting that lived experience data is really important to me. And then also coming up with a growth plan where we're getting to profitable as quick as possible. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times now. Yeah. But having information to really assess how are we in terms of our market performance. How are the teams serving? What percentage of the market are we serving? What is our ideal client fit? Are we achieving success with those types of clients? All the metrics that you use to measure what is our effectiveness as an expert practitioner in this market. And so that was really important. And then I think behind the scenes, operationally, are things working well together, right? Is the really broad thing that I'm looking at. And, especially when I think about tied to profitability, a lot of times company leaders see marketing and sales as cost centers, right? And so I always try to shift in the effort to get to profitable as quick as possible, shift that into profit centers. If we have expertise, the clients that we work with should experience some of our expertise as part of the buying process, and they'll probably pay us for that. So whether you're launching a digital community to help you seed relationships with customers, or you're providing an e-curriculum, a course that you've developed based on your expertise to help you engage clients early on, those teams become quickly neutral or potentially profit centers for the business. And they start to think not only about producing growth outcomes and revenue, but also they're accountable for some service delivery. And it just helps spread the accountability across all teams for not only revenue, but providing really meaningful service to clients. So anything tied to kind of are things integrated and working well on the back end to be able to provide that front level market engagement is really important.
And that's platform agnostic in terms of, being in the cloud, being available any place, right? On my mobile
and
device.
I think the other thing that was because I've served a lot of clients who are in public facing sectors, so higher education, media, journalism, city governments, membership organizations. I have a lot of experience in public service sectors. And, data privacy is so important, making sure that all the systems that we have, at Harkin, we had a team in Europe, we held several privacy regulations. I think the more decentralized your data is, and the less cohesive, you're also running the risk of losing a bit of just data privacy integrity. And now that we see more states launching state level privacy laws that are independent, I think, teams really need to take a more centralized approach to ensure that integrity.
That's a great point. It's one thing to have data, but if it doesn't have integrity behind it, it's fairly worthless, right? And it's
Right.
a time waster rather than a benefit to you. From going back to your experience with Harkin, and I know you did some. I think even previous to that, you did some M&A activity. Can you give me a better sense of getting to a finite point, an endpoint? What are some of the challenges you faced in kind of completing the deal? How do you seal the deal, and what advice would you give to others on that point? And because that's an inflection point, it's so difficult. And I know I've been there and failed, as well as succeeded. What do you see at that point?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that come to mind, Rich, right away. I mentioned kind of the communication part earlier, right? So I think not underestimating the time and the importance of having a communications plan as a part of the merger process would be one thing. And making sure your communications are really organized and in a centralized place, you can quickly leverage them as you work through the entire transaction. And even as you're starting the transaction, whatever legal team, whatever counsel you select to support the company through an M&A process, you have to be able to really quickly communicate everything you can to that legal team about the business, who you serve, financials, just where the business is at. Because there's so many nuances in navigating that complex of a transaction that if you make a misstep and they misinterpret, a key part about the business, that could have an impact on a part of the deal. And so I think just making sure that upfront, you're really presenting that holistic view for everyone involved in the transaction of why this is important, where you're going, and the current state of the business is really, really important. The second piece, I think, is just really having that business planning element that you can leverage throughout the parts of the transaction. So that's having quick access to your financials, accounting data integrated in. You might have a plan and a forecast, but being able to see in actuality how things are changing, because the transaction time, the deal time is long sometimes for an M&A. It's not quick, and it's all time consuming for your leadership team. And so, you might put together that plan at the front end of an M&A, and then, 6 months later, a key change happens. That's what happened to us at Harkin. We started the M&A process, I think, in summer of 2019, and then March 2020, COVID hit, and it changed everything because we had digital engagement products. We saw a huge spike in growth overnight. And suddenly we wanted to be in a position to respond to that growth. And I remember communicating even, during that time to our investor group, hey, we took a 3-week pause because this is a huge opportunity for us that we need to wrap our time and attention around. But if I wouldn't have said that and they didn't hear from us, that's a concern, right? If you go 3 weeks without hearing anything, like, are we progressing in the merger? That's a concern. So really having all of the data you need to assess how is the business progressing, while also how is the deal progressing in one place, is really, really important.
Well, I have to say, and I appreciate all your insight, because it validates what I've always thought in my head, that you're a rock star. And so thank you for sharing so much with us. I do want to conclude with a final question, that if talking about empowering entrepreneurs, and if we're talking to an audience of people that are just walking in the door and they're saying, I'm starting a company X and here I go. What's the one thing Chelsea says to them so that they feel empowered and they can succeed?
I don't know if there's one thing. Can I conjoin two things, I would say, in one
Of course
setting?
you can.
I think it would be get to profitable as soon as possible and or maybe by centering the needs of your customers in everything that you do. So, by really taking that networked approach to growth and serving with whatever products or services you've developed for your customers, you will get to profitable. And getting to profitable really gives you that freedom to grow the business over time in the way that you would like to. And I think a lot of early stage founders and CEOs that come to me and I engage with, they're so focused on finding the right investor. And I think that's an important piece, but I think you can also spend so much time and energy on finding that right set of investors if you're a service-minded entrepreneur. And it can be really hard to do, especially for women. Quite frankly, we know a lot of venture capital dollars don't go towards women and founders of color. And so I think if you are in a position where you have expertise in the market and you can start generating revenue right away, I would encourage you to think about focusing on getting to that profitable place as quick as you can, finding investors that have creative financing or capital options that aren't necessarily equity-based, that will just allow you to have some breathing room to figure out how am I going to serve my customers with the expertise I have over time.
Equity is everything, right? And as you go along, and later on, if you've given up too much early, you will regret that decision, because getting to $100,000, it may seem daunting, but if you give up 50% of the company to do that for a couple, 20 grand or something, it's just not worth it, right? And so I wholeheartedly agree with you that kind of maintaining your equity, getting to profitability as quickly as you can, and frankly, maybe you don't need investment. Maybe your company doesn't need it. You can persevere and get to that next level without having that early investment. But at the same time, if you get to a point where you can't meet the needs of your customer, as you just said, that being centralizing their need in your in what you're trying to do. If you can't meet that need, then you need to make a decision, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you're in such a great position to talk to investors when you've got that core need of your customer set at the reason for why you're seeking financing to improve the product.
Yeah. Well, this has been tremendously helpful to me, and I'm hopefully our audience. And thank you, Chelsea, for your time today. Always inspirational and very just a wealth of knowledge. So thank you.
Thanks, Rich, to you. And I'm super excited to follow your progress.
Thank you so much.